The story opens by introducing Job, a wealthy and righteous man from the land of Uz. He is described as blameless and upright, a man who fears God and avoids evil. Job's character sets the foundation for the intense trials he will face. The land of Uz is believed to be in the region of Edom, or northern Arabia. Job's reputation as a just and honorable man was widely known. Job's prosperity is detailed. He owns 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, along with numerous servants. His wealth signifies his social status and the blessings God had bestowed upon him. Job's 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, frequently gather for feasts, reflecting their closeness as a family. Job is deeply concerned about his children's spiritual well-being. After their feasts, he regularly offers sacrifices for them, fearing they may have sinned in their hearts. This act reveals Job's dedication to righteousness and his constant desire to uphold God's will. The scene shifts to the heavenly realm, where God holds counsel with his heavenly beings. Satan, the accuser, appears among them. God praises Job's righteousness, but Satan argues that Job's faithfulness is only due to his prosperity. Satan claims that if Job loses everything, he will curse God. God grants Satan permission to test Job, but with one condition: Satan cannot harm Job physically. This divine allowance sets the stage for the suffering Job is about to endure. This moment underscores the theme of testing and God's confidence in Job's faith. Satan begins his assault by targeting Job's possessions. Raiders steal his oxen and donkeys, fire from the sky consumes his sheep, and Chaldean bandits seize his camels. Each disaster strikes in rapid succession, leaving Job stripped of his wealth. The greatest blow comes when a violent wind collapses the house where Job's children are feasting, killing all 10 of them. This tragic loss highlights the depth of Job's suffering, making his trials intensely personal. Despite overwhelming grief, Job mourns. Yet, instead of cursing God, Job worships and declares, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job's remarkable response demonstrates his unwavering faith and trust in God's plan. Satan returns to the heavenly council and insists that Job will curse God if his health is attacked. God allows Satan to afflict Job physically, but forbids him from taking Job's life. Satan strikes Job with painful boils that cover his entire body, from head to toe. Job suffers from intense pain, his skin becomes infected, and he is forced to sit among ashes, scraping his sores with a broken piece of pottery. Despite this agony, Job refuses to curse God. As Job endures his painful afflictions, his wife, overwhelmed by grief and despair, confronts him. She says, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." Job responds with calm yet firm words. "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Despite his wife's urging, Job refuses to sin or speak against God. His strength in this moment reveals his remarkable patience and trust. 3 of Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, hear of his suffering and travel to comfort him. When they arrive, they are shocked at Job's condition. They barely recognize him, due to his disfigured appearance. Moved by grief, they tear their robes, sprinkle dust on their heads, and sit with Job in silence for 7 days, a powerful sign of mourning and respect. After a week of silence, Job finally speaks. In his anguish, he curses the day of his birth. Job says, "Why did I not perish at birth?" and questions why life is given to those who suffer deeply. His words reveal his deep sorrow and the emotional turmoil he faces. Eliphaz, the first friend to speak, suggests that Job's suffering is a result of his sin. He advises Job to seek God's forgiveness, believing that suffering is a form of divine discipline. Eliphaz emphasizes that God blesses those who accept correction. Job defends himself, insisting that his suffering is not due to hidden sin. He laments his pain and describes his hopelessness. Job longs for God to explain the reason behind his suffering. Bildad harshly claims that Job's children must have died because of their sins. He urges Job to repent, arguing that God restores the righteous. Bildad's speech intensifies Job's grief as he refuses to believe Job's innocence. Job maintains his innocence and pleads for someone to mediate between him and God. He laments that God seems distant and silent in his suffering. Zophar strongly criticizes Job, claiming Job's punishment is deserved. He suggests Job's suffering could be even worse if God's full justice were delivered. Zophar advises Job to repent so God might restore him. Job angrily responds to his friends, accusing them of being poor comforters. He questions why they are so quick to judge him without understanding his suffering. Job passionately asserts that God alone controls life and death. In one of the most powerful moments of the story, Job expresses faith in a future hope. He declares, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth." Despite his suffering, Job believes that God will ultimately vindicate him. Eliphaz speaks again, still convinced that Job's suffering is due to hidden sin. He accuses Job of failing to help the needy, suggesting that Job's misfortune is a direct consequence of his actions. Eliphaz urges Job to repent and promises that God will restore him if he turns from his supposed wickedness. Deeply frustrated, Job laments the unfairness of his suffering. He declares that God seems distant and that justice is impossible to find. Job reflects on the prosperity of the wicked, questioning why evil people thrive while the righteous suffer. Bildad responds by insisting that God's justice is perfect. No one can be truly righteous before him. He warns that God's power crushes even the strongest people, implying Job's fate is deserved. In a shift from lament, Job reflects deeply on wisdom. He describes wisdom as more precious than gold and declares that only God truly understands the path to it. Job concludes that the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. Zophar argues that the wicked always face destruction and accuses Job of stubbornly refusing to admit guilt. He warns that Job's future will be filled with even greater suffering unless he repents. Job reflects on his past life, a time when he was honored and respected. He recalls his acts of kindness, his support for widows and orphans, and how people. Job vividly describes his suffering. His body is covered with sores. His friends have turned against him. His skin has blackened, and his bones burn with fever. Job mourns his loss of status and feels mocked by those who once admired him. A younger man named Elihu, who had silently listened to the debate, finally speaks. Elihu criticizes both Job and his friends. He rebukes the friends for failing to provide wisdom and challenges Job for questioning God's justice. Elihu introduces a new perspective. Suffering may be God's way of warning people or refining their character. He emphasizes that God's wisdom and power surpass human understanding. Elihu urges Job to submit to God, believing that God's purpose will ultimately bring justice and restoration. After Elihu finishes speaking, God himself speaks to Job from a powerful whirlwind. God challenges Job's understanding of creation and life, asking, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" God's questions reveal Job's limited knowledge and remind him that divine wisdom is far beyond human understanding. God continues his speech by describing the complexity of the natural world. He asks Job if he can control the rain, lightning, or snow, command the morning to rise or the stars to align. Each question emphasizes God's sovereignty over creation. God describes Behemoth, a massive and powerful land creature known for its strength. Behemoth symbolizes a force too mighty for humans to control, yet fully subject to God's command. This illustration demonstrates God's supreme authority over even the most powerful beasts. God then speaks of Leviathan, a fearsome sea creature with impenetrable scales, fiery breath, and unmatched power. God asks, "Can you pull in Leviathan with a hook?" Leviathan's description portrays chaos and danger that only God can tame, underscoring Job's inability to grasp God's full power. Overwhelmed by God's words, Job humbly responds, "I am unworthy. How can I reply to you?" He acknowledges his limited understanding and places his trust in God's wisdom. In deep humility, Job repents for doubting God's justice and says, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Job's experience leads him to a deeper understanding of God's greatness and his own dependence on him. After addressing Job, God turns to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. God rebukes them for speaking falsely about him and misrepresenting his justice. He instructs them to offer sacrifices and asks Job to pray on their behalf. Despite their harsh accusations, Job forgives his friends and prays for them. This act of compassion and intercession reveals Job's righteous character. God blesses Job abundantly, restoring twice as much as he had before. 14,000 sheep, double the original count. 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 donkeys. This restoration symbolizes God's favor and the triumph of Job's enduring faith. God blesses Job with 10 more children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. Job's daughters are described as the most beautiful women in the land, and Job grants them an inheritance alongside their brothers, an unusual and honorable act in that time. After his trials, Job enjoys a long and peaceful life. He lives for 140 more years, witnessing 4 generations of his descendants. This extended life reflects God's complete restoration and the fulfillment of his divine plan. Generations pass down Job's story as a powerful reminder that suffering is not always a sign of guilt. His life stands as an example of endurance and the ultimate victory of faith.